On a winter night in 39 AD, Rome seemed to hold its breath, not because of the cold, though frost clung to the rooftops, but because every family with a daughter knew this was the night someone's child would vanish behind palace doors. Imagine being 14 years old, dressed for sleep, believing the world outside your window was finally quiet. Then you hear armoured footsteps threading through your street, deliberate and heavy, as inevitable as fate. You were raised on stories that an imperial summons was an honour. No one warned you it could come without warning. No one told you that the Emperor's guards felt no need to knock before crossing your threshold. And absolutely no one warned you about the red-shrouded lantern they carried, a silent emblem placed at your door marking your home as chosen. In a few minutes, your mother will whisper your name like a prayer she hopes the gods won't hear. In a few minutes, your father will force a smile that fractures instantly. And in a few minutes, you will learn the truth every noble family fears. The Palatine does not invite daughters. It takes them. And if you believe Flavia's nightmare starts here, you misunderstand Rome's cruelty. What waits inside the palace will make this moment feel merciful. This isn't rumour. This was the night the Garden of Venus opened, a ritual so terrifying the Empire buried every trace of it. If hidden horrors of the past compel you, subscribe to Grim History, hit the like button, and tell me where you're watching from once you reach the moment that unsettles you most. Let us begin. Flavia is the first girl whose life we will follow. But to understand why she becomes entangled in a darkness far larger than herself, you must first understand the man who will decide her fate. Caligula did not emerge fully formed from madness. He was shaped, slowly, painfully, by a lineage that carried both glory and corruption. He was born into radiance, the son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general, whose presence alone could electrify a legion. The boy should have inherited honour, duty, leadership. Instead, something colder seeped into him. His childhood played out not among tutors and gardens, but on the hard edges of the empire, among camps that smelled of sweat, iron, and the metallic tang of war. He learned to walk between rows of weathered legionaries, the earth trembling beneath thousands of hobnailed boots. The soldiers adored him. Seeing Germanicus's son in miniature armour, they affectionately called him Caligula, Little Boot, a name spoken in warmth, yet destined to cling to a much darker legend. But even as a child, something inside him tilted. The frontier world taught him a brutal truth. Power isn't inherited, power is taken. And once taken, it never needs to apologize. It was the first fracture in his soul. Many more would follow. The shattering came swiftly. Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances, poison whispered in the shadows, treachery implied between the lines of official statements. Overnight, the beloved son became a target. He watched as his mother and brothers were exiled, imprisoned, destroyed, not by invading tribes, but by Emperor Tiberius himself. Then came Capri. Rome imagined Tiberius spent his final years in quiet retirement. The truth was far darker. Capri was a palace built inside paranoia, sealed with fear. Caligula, hardly more than a boy, was forced to live in the very house of the man who had dismantled his family piece by piece. Capri was not a refuge. It was a cage with windows that faced the sea but open to nothing. Under the emperor's constant suspicion, Caligula survived by swallowing rage until it became part of him. He learned his second lesson. To survive, you must smile at the person you want to destroy. He hid every tremor of fury, every tear, every spark of grief. For 6 suffocating years, he perfected the art of obedience. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, the Senate exalted Caligula, now 24, as the new princeps. Rome erupted in celebration. Citizens poured into the streets convinced the son of Germanicus would restore honour to the empire. And for a brief moment he did. He freed political prisoners, he burned the records of Tiberius's spies, he slashed oppressive taxes, he showered the city with feasts, spectacles, gold. Rome believed it had been rescued. But the darkness that Capri had carved into him had not yet awakened. Near the end of his first year in power, Caligula fell violently ill. He hovered between life and the underworld. And when he rose from that bed, something essential in his mind did not rise with him. Standing atop the Palatine Hill, gazing over a city that adored him, Caligula tasted a revelation, At the summit of absolute authority, there are no gods above you, only victims below. His sanity began to peel away like scorched parchment. The mask of benevolence cracked. Beneath it crawled the creature years of trauma had shaped. Generosity twisted into mania. Justice soured into cruelty. Amusement turned into experimentation. And somewhere across Rome, Flavia's household heard a knock. The knock no family wanted, but none could refuse. It began with a visit unlike any other. The emperor's heralds did not arrive armed. Instead, they carried scrolls sealed with imperial purple, the colour that meant submission or obliteration. Inside was the decree no parent dared deny. Send your daughter. Not just any daughter. Your most beautiful, your most innocent, your most politically valuable. To refuse was treason. To obey was surrender. Families called it an honour. They knew it was a death sentence disguised as privilege. The girls were taken to a secluded wing of the palace. An ornate maze Caligula christened the Garden of Venus. Its name suggested beauty. Its purpose was control. Flavia stepped inside, still believing she might serve in ceremonies, speak in rituals, or at the very least retain some sliver of autonomy. She would lose that illusion within hours. At first glance, the garden was paradise. Walls veined with rose-coloured marble, beds draped in silk, floors that reflected torchlight like calm water. Attendants drifted silently, anticipating each need, offering perfumes, jewellery, comforts. But paradise was only the mask. The prison hid beneath it. Silks draped over their bodies didn't clothe. They branded. They were not decorative. They signalled possession. Gold ornaments weighed upon the girls' shoulders not as gifts but as chains. Their names were taken, replaced with nicknames, titles, designations that erased identity and history in one stroke. But the Empire's most effective weapon wasn't silk or gold. It was waiting. Waiting for footsteps in the hall. Waiting for the sound of Praetorian sandals. Waiting to learn whether tonight would be the night they were chosen. Anticipation hollowed them. Sleep became a torment. Breathing became effort. By the time the summons came for any girl, her spirit was already cracked. And then came the banquets. Not chaotic, not frantic. Ritualized spectacles where the young women were positioned like rare ornaments before Rome's elite. Caligula moved among them with the detachment of a man choosing objects, not people. He commented openly, cruelly, enjoying the forced smiles of senators and generals whose own daughters stood on display. The silence of Rome's greatest men was its own form of execution. Fathers, uncles, future husbands, all sat rigid at tables, pretending not to see their own complicity reflected in their daughters' frightened eyes. Any tremor of disgust could condemn them, or the girl. This system didn't break the girls quickly. It broke them slowly, methodically, while ensuring they understood every step of their undoing. Flavia tried to disappear into the crowd, but invisibility was dangerous. Caligula cultivated dependency, cruelty followed by feigned kindness, threats followed by gifts. It rewired the mind, making the tormentor the only source of relief. Unity among the girls dissolved. Competition replaced compassion. Survival replaced sisterhood. Once solidarity died, Caligula owned everything. By the time the first suicides occurred, the palace didn't speak of them. It hid them. And Flavia drifted somewhere between breaking and shattering, learning the truth. You cannot resist a man who believes he is a god. Flavia drifted somewhere between breaking and shattering, learning the truth no Roman law could soften. You cannot resist a man who believes he is a god. And Caligula, now fully awakened to the depth of his own delusion, reshaped the palace around that belief. The Garden of Venus was no longer a sanctuary, or even a prison. It became a laboratory where he refined new methods of control. The girls were not left alone long enough to form bonds, yet not occupied enough to forget their own fear. Days stretched into an unbroken haze of anticipation, punctured only by the echo of Praetorian boots in the corridors. That sound alone could unravel them. A single footstep had the power to freeze the blood in their veins. No one told them when their summons would come. No one explained why one girl was chosen and another was spared. The randomness was the method. The uncertainty was the weapon. At night, the palace transformed into a stage. The banquets Caligula hosted were not meals but orchestrated performances of dominance. The young women were positioned along the periphery, elevated on marble platforms or arranged beside tables where senators lounged with forced indifference. Caligula stalked among them with the calm arrogance of a man inspecting livestock, pausing to comment idly on hair, posture, ancestry, anything that reminded the room that their worth existed only through his gaze. The cruelty of his remarks was secondary. What mattered was that Rome's elite, fathers, uncles, future husbands, sat at those tables and smiled through gritted teeth. To them, disgust was treason. Anger was death. Their silence damned the river of outrage that should have drowned the emperor long ago. And the girls learned a brutal lesson. If the men who loved them would not speak, no one would. Caligula perfected the art of psychological inversion, pairing brutality with counterfeit affection so seamlessly that victims could no longer distinguish terror from reprieve. One night he might berate a girl mercilessly, reducing her to trembling silence. The next, he might drape her in jewels worth a general's lifetime salary and speak to her with almost tender warmth. The shift was a strategic cruelty, a manipulation engineered to fracture identity. Over time, the girls stopped trusting their own perceptions. They stopped trusting each other even faster. The emperor ranked them publicly, who pleased him, who bored him, who would receive favour or punishment. Favour meant temporary safety. Punishment meant disappearance into rooms no one returned from. The competition soon consumed whatever solidarity they had left. Every whispered rumour, every slight glance, every accidental misstep became a reason to suspect one another. Unity died quietly in the Garden of Venus, and once unity fell, Caligula owned their minds as thoroughly as he owned their bodies. The fate of those who ceased to interest him was perhaps the most chilling part of the system. He did not discard them. He traded them quietly, discreetly to senators, generals, wealthy patrons who governed Rome by day and hid their shame by night. These men, pillars of the empire, accepted the offerings without protest. Their participation polluted them, binding them to the emperor with iron chains of complicity. Shared guilt was the strongest leash Caligula ever forged. He no longer needed loyalty. He needed silence, and silence he received. But the palace could not silence everything. By 40 AD, the Garden of Venus had become a corridor of hollow-eyed shadows. The girls who had once arrived with proud posture and hopeful expressions now drifted through the halls like ghosts. Many had stopped speaking entirely, their voices locked somewhere deep within a mind that had retreated for protection. Others responded only when commanded. Physicians noted dissociation, souls slipping from bodies, leaving only shells behind. Sleep became an enemy. Dreams replayed the rituals they had endured. Some girls clawed at their own skin, trying to wake from nightmares that did not end when morning came. And then the suicides began, not all at once, quietly, desperately, inevitably. Some girls used fragments of shattered pottery. Others fashioned crude nooses from torn strips of silk. A few climbed the balconies and stepped into the air, letting gravity grant the mercy their emperor never would. The palace tried to hide the deaths. Servants whispered of 6 confirmed cases, but everyone knew the truth. 6 was simply the number they failed to conceal. The real count lay buried beneath marble floors and imperial silence, whispered names, empty chambers, vanished footsteps, and Flavia, caught somewhere between terror and numb endurance, began to wonder whether survival was actually the cruelest outcome. Death, once the thing they feared most, now seemed the only horizon that offered release. A final act of sovereignty in a world where they owned nothing, not even their own names. Yet Rome's cruelty did not stop at the daughters. In a twist of psychological torment unmatched even by Tiberius's tyranny, Caligula allowed parents occasional visits, not to comfort their children, not to rescue them, but to witness them suffer. The girls were painted, perfumed, dressed in ceremonial fabrics designed to mask bruises and conceal sleepless eyes. They were forced to smile, to speak lightly, to pretend. Their remaining dignity had to be constructed from lies, and their parents, under the unblinking gaze of the armed guards, had to mirror the illusion. Any crack in their voice could mean execution. Any flicker of truth could doom their entire household. Everyone in that chamber performed a grotesque theatre, daughters pretending to be safe, parents pretending to believe them. Caligula watched with serene satisfaction. He did not simply conquer Rome's bodies, he conquered its souls. But then Caligula committed the single mistake every tyrant eventually makes. He humiliated the men who carried swords. Destroying young women was not enough. He needed to diminish Rome's pillars. He dragged senators to witness their wives endure the same ritual humiliation. He mocked commanders in public, stripping them of dignity before their own soldiers. Among these men was Cassius Chaerea, a veteran, once fiercely loyal to Germanicus. Caligula targeted him relentlessly, ridiculing him with crude insults, turning a decorated officer into a laughingstock. At first, Chaerea endured. But the emperor's cruelty mutated into something sharper than mockery. It became a survival threat. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's shield, began to see Caligula not as a ruler, but as a disease eating the empire from within, and so the conspiracy formed, not out of political ambition, but desperation. On January 24th, 41 AD, during the Palatine Games, Caligula excused himself to take a bath. He stepped into the Cryptoporticus, a dim underground corridor lined with torches that hissed softly in the stale air. He believed himself immortal. He believed no blade would ever dare rise against him. He was wrong. Chaerea and the conspirators blocked his path. There was no speech, no accusation, only steel. The first strike tore into his neck, extinguishing the voice that had demanded to be worshipped. His screams dissolved into a wet gasp as blood flooded his throat. Then came the frenzy. Blow after blow, a storm of vengeance, over 30 stab wounds tearing into the man who had unmade so many lives. Caligula collapsed onto the cold stone, writhing briefly, then went still. Rome's self-proclaimed god died not with thunder, but with a whimper swallowed by darkness. But the nightmare did not end with his final breath. His Germanic bodyguards, discovering their emperor dead, erupted into blind fury. The palace transformed into a slaughterhouse in minutes. Servants, officials, bystanders, anyone caught in their path, fell beneath their rage. The Garden of Venus, already a place of torment, became a death trap. Some girls fled barefoot through corridors littered with shattered lamps and blood. Others barricaded themselves in their chambers, gripping one another in the dark, unable to discern whether the chaos outside meant doom or freedom. Hours later, when the blood haze finally cleared, an unlikely figure emerged from hiding. Claudius, Caligula's trembling uncle, dragged from behind a curtain and proclaimed the emperor. Claudius, bookish, awkward, underestimated, now faced a truth darker than anything he had anticipated. If Rome learned what had happened inside the Garden of Venus, the empire's political foundations would collapse. Too many powerful men were implicated, too many families complicit, too many secrets intertwined with the state itself. So Claudius made a decision. He did not pursue justice, he pursued silence. The surviving girls were returned to their households draped in gold, adorned with fine fabrics, and given dowries so large they smothered outrage. Every coin carried the same unspoken command: forget. Forget what happened. Forget who allowed it. Forget what Rome sacrificed to preserve its illusion of virtue. Most girls never married. Most never healed. They were hidden within distant wings of their estates, tended only by servants who left food quietly at their doors. Their trauma became predictable. Panic at a hand on the shoulder, terror at a raised voice, sleepless nights haunted by memories they could not erase. Physical captivity had ended, but the prison in their minds remained without walls, without guards, without escape. Rome turned away. Rome always turned away. It was easier to blame the victims, easier to bury the crime, easier to pretend the empire remained pure. The story of these girls was not preserved in marble or ink. It lived only in whispers, in gaps in the record, in empty rooms where daughters never returned to laugh or speak again. Later, historians debated the details. Suetonius exaggerated, some claimed. Rival dynasties had motives to smear Caligula. But the convergence of evidence tells one truth. A machine of abuse existed, built by one man and protected by an entire system. Rome concentrated absolute power in the hands of a single ruler, with no checks, no limits, no escape if the wrong man ascended the throne. Caligula proved how thin the line is between civilization and savagery, between order and horror. Rome erected monuments that still stand today, arenas, aqueducts, temples. But it failed the simplest task of any society, protecting its most vulnerable from the predators at its summit. And so the shadows remained, the erased names, the unspoken screams, the silk pillows where tears dried and vanished. These remnants of suffering buried beneath centuries of silence belong to us now. It is our choice whether to look at them or repeat them, because evil does not always march in with fire. Sometimes evil wears a crown. Sometimes it survives through silence. Sometimes it thrives simply because too many people choose not to care. If this story disturbed you, let it. If it outraged you, let it. And if it made you reflect on the dangers of unchecked power, then the voices Rome tried to erase have finally been heard.